judges.
Political analyst Wendy Patrick, Laura Fink join us with more. Ladies, good morning.
Good morning, Shelley.
Let's start and talk with this travel ban blocked again. What does the White House do now, Laura?
Well, the White House has to figure out its next move because in Maryland and Hawaii, the travel ban seemed to be a Muslim ban. The court essentially announced that a Muslim ban by any other name is still a Muslim ban. And they weighed in with Trump's previous statements on the campaign trail and beyond, holding those against him. Right now, what they are ruling is that our country does not have the right to choose one religion over the other, and effectively saying that the countries that he delineated would do just that. So it doesn't matter that every Muslim nation is not banned. It matters that those 6 have predominantly Muslim populations in combination with his statements. This is a big defeat for the Trump administration.
Wendy, and also the judges admitted that the words that Donald Trump used during the campaign, they considered this in making this decision.
I got to tell you, Raul, President Trump's worst enemy right about now is candidate Trump. Because it's the words that candidate Trump said on the trail that came back to haunt him during that 1-2 punch that his travel ban suffered yesterday. However, remember that both can be true. In other words, this is why this is so tricky and no doubt headed for the Supreme Court. President Trump says that this is to keep Americans safe. In other words, the rationale, the intent is national security. But can it also be an attempt to disfavor one religion over another? So you've got these dueling narratives. There's evidence for both. That is one of the reasons that this case is likely to result in inconsistent verdicts in different jurisdictions. That primes a case for the Supreme Court. That's the kind of case they want to hear, where judges in different parts of the country come to different conclusions. Now, that hasn't happened yet. It didn't happen yesterday, but no doubt as more of these cases continue to be challenged, that is where we're headed.
Okay, I'm just curious to think, do you think the administration was expecting this, another block over and over again? Do they think that this was just going to go through?
No, they expected another block. In fact, President Trump himself called this a watered-down version. It was very similar to the first. And again, candidate Trump's statements are as much of an impediment to, let's say, travel ban version 2.0 than they were to 1.0.
And it's not just his statements, it's also his staff statements that effectively made that argument for a Muslim ban while they were in the White House. So all of this and all of the precedent and all of the judges' rulings thus far indicate that he's going to have a hard road to the Supreme Court.
What is the Supreme Court going to say? Because they would not consider candidate Trump's words in making their decision, would they?
Well, here's what they're going to have to look at. Okay, so there's 2 issues here. First is the intent behind the travel ban.
Okay.
Second is on the 4 corners of the travel ban, is it constitutional? So that you come to a difference of opinion depending on who you ask. And there's lots of great legal minds. Remember, one of the times we talked about how precedent trumps President Trump. In other words, legal precedent controls. On the other hand, regardless of underlying intent, is it possible to have a ban that's constitutional on its face be upheld? Those are tricky questions. And no doubt, once Neil Gorsuch is confirmed, as I've said before, I think he will be, maybe once the Supreme Court has that full staff, they're going to have to be the ones that decide that.
Let's talk a little bit about the budget plan. Announced yesterday, and part of it, the wall. Money for the wall. Laura?
Well, you have money for the wall, you have an increase in the defense budget, and you also have to look, where is he going to get that money? And he's going not to the big areas where our government spends money. He's not touching Social Security or Medicare, which we know is politically difficult. He's going for every other dime in the federal budget. And that covers some really important things. Things like the NIH, which funds scientific research. He's going after kids' school lunches. He's going after Meals on Wheels for seniors, dollars to local law enforcement, and he's cutting federal departments with a hatchet and not a scalpel. The State Department by a third, which even defense experts suggest would really cripple our diplomacy. He's going after the EPA by a third, so they will not have the ability to prevent things like the Flint water crisis. They're responsible for making sure that people follow our air and our clean water laws. So all of this, because he's going after so aggressively these programs from this small slice of the budget, there are going to be programs entirely eliminated potentially and also severely cut. But I will say this, they say the president proposes and Congress disposes. This is really a blueprint that describes his values. It does not necessarily describe what Congress will end up doing.
Wendy?
Well, nobody wants to see the president going after school lunch programs with a hatchet. And Donald Trump has to be very careful about the press that's being given this very important issue. Because you remember what he campaigned on? He campaigned on jobs. He campaigned on making the country better for everyone. He called himself the blue-collar businessman. Remember that?
Yeah.
So he's got to be very careful in fulfilling the Pledge of Allegiance. In other words, following his mouth with his actions and with the money. So everything that is being proposed, this has got to have bipartisan support, because there are many Republicans that are not in line with some of the cuts he's proposing, some of the places where he's proposing to get money from. This is an issue that's going to be around for a while, because it's not one in which he's ultimately familiar. So one can only hope he surrounds himself with the kind of team that can decide how to implement these changes that benefits everyone. That's what he campaigned on. That's his promise.
We had a financial guy talking to us about the federal, the Fed interest rate, the hikes that's now going into effect, that's going to perhaps slow down the economy when the president wanted to boost the economy. So what is the Fed interest rate hikes going to mean moving forward now?
Well, it depends on how you define boosting the economy. The Fed's job is one that is apolitical, and their goal is stability. They want to make sure that our economy is stable and continues to grow. But they also want to prevent inflation, because if our interest rates are low and we can go buy a car at a lower rate, that doesn't matter if we're paying $100 for a bag of potatoes. And those are extreme examples, but those are the challenges that the economists at the Fed have to undertake. Now, they may be at odds with the political desires of a president from either party that wants to show off a report card that shows explosive economic growth. But really, there's a high price to be paid by all of us if the Fed doesn't do its job and keep a stable economy.
All right, Wendy, well, let's say after the last word.
I say, as a last word, this is a particularly relevant discussion for those of us that live in San Diego, where the cost of living is already high. So we have a very personal vested interest in making sure that these changes don't unnecessarily affect the inflation rate here, so that it's even more difficult to make ends meet. So this is one issue that San Diegans have their eye on, because it is so personal to all of us.
Always so much to talk about. Happy St. Patrick's Day to both of you. I love the green.
None of us are going to get pinched today.
No.
We're good. We're good.
Thank you, ladies. Wendy and Laura.
Thanks,
All right,
Joel.
thanks,
Thanks,
Raul.
Shelley.
Thanks, Shelley.